So if you would please, men of Madison, leading with power, men of Madison, at this power lunch, let's give a big warm welcome to John McHugh. John.
I would hope that those people that know me would say that I'm a good person. Although I hope that I'm very ashamed to say that I have an FBI record. People go, geez, what kind of speaker did you bring in to talk about faith if he has an FBI record? Well, when I was a senior in high school, I was living in the central part of the state, near Wausau. I went to D.C. Everest Public High School. When I was a senior, I was allowed to do an independent study program in mathematics and science. And in the course of that, I ended up writing a 50-page paper on something called an OTV. It's an acronym. It means Orbital Transfer Vehicle. It was a small spaceship designed to go in the cargo bay of the space shuttle. The space shuttle would go into Earth orbit, and the smaller ship would come out and it would go to the moon and back. It was based off of existing technology from the old Apollo missions, from the shuttle program, and from a rocket engine that Rockwell International had been designing at the time called an OE-1. And this is in the mid-'80s, in which NASA was deciding whether or not it was going to do the permanent space station or go back to the moon permanently. So if we go back to the moon, we're going to require about 8,500 pounds of supplies on a regular basis to keep the astronauts going. You know, all the things that you can't find on the moon. Water, oxygen, food. Well, in the course of these studies, I found out that this little ship I designed could carry 10,000 pounds of supplies, well within NASA's parameters. And that fully loaded, this ship came in at 59,500 pounds. The shuttle had a payload carrying capacity of 65,000 pounds. Again, all within NASA's parameters. So I wrote this 50-page paper, and I presented it at the University of Wisconsin-Madison here in the state science fair. And I finished first in the state in area of physics. And so I got sent to West Point, New York to represent the state of Wisconsin in the National Science Fair. Well, the whole crux of this design was that if you took this rocket engine and you used a fuel called monomethylhydrazine, and then you combined an oxidizer with it, because there's no oxygen in space, you have to artificially provide that. If you use nitrogen tetroxide as an oxidizer, and then you added a third chemical to it, a type of chloramine, you got something called a high specific impulse. It's fancy terminology. It means you get a lot of miles to the gallon. Well, if you get a lot of miles to the gallon in your rocket fuel, it's that much less fuel you have to carry, that much more space for payload. That was really the crux of the issue. So I wrote to this company out in California, and I asked for a half an ounce of this chemical, special chloramine. You know where this story's going, don't you? And I wrote to the company, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited. And one night when we're at dinner, there's a knock on the door. And my dad answered the door. My dad was John McHugh Sr. I'm John McHugh Jr. My dad made Jeff Foxworthy look like a cultured genius, okay? My dad used four-letter words as nouns, adjectives, adverbs, prepositions, commas. You know. Smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day, never graduated high school, was a construction worker. And he answers the door, and it's the Marathon County Sheriff, which was Leo Giannoli at the time, and 2 FBI agents. And they said, "Are you John McHugh?" My dad said, "Yes." "Well, what do you want with a half an ounce of chloramine?" And my dad said, "What the is chloramine?" And all of a sudden it dawned on him, "Johnny, get over here." And I was in the deepest doo-doo of my life. Because if you take a half an ounce of this chemical and you heat it to 140 degrees, which you could easily do on your kitchen stove, it's enough to level a 1-mile hill. It's highly explosive. That's why you get a lot of miles to the gallon in the whole thing. So the company in California thought it was some nutcase in central Wisconsin building a bomb in his basement, you know. So they contacted the authorities and said, "You need to come check this out." So I had to bring all 3 guys into my bedroom, and I'm going to date myself on this one. I had to power up my Texas Instruments computer when we saved data on a cassette player and show them I was just nerdy, geeky kid designing a rocket. I wasn't the Unabomber in Wisconsin. Well, because of that, I end up with an FBI record for the knowledge of dangerous chemicals. And it'll say right in my file what the chemicals are. Now, for the sake of national security, I wholeheartedly agree with that. Because if something's ever blown up and the chemical residue is this type of chloramine, they got a short list of yahoos that they can come after. They know. Well, jump ahead now 8 years later. My sister was in the Air Force career. She was a chef by trade. And she got recruited for her dream job. They wanted her to be the head chef for the Joint Chiefs of Staff in Washington, D.C. And if any of you have military backgrounds, you know that the level of military clearance you need for the Joint Chiefs of Staff is at the highest level. And they'll go back 20 years to people you don't even remember to make sure that you're not a terrorist. Well, it took them all of 30 seconds to go in the database to find out that her immediate biological sibling is on the FBI list for the knowledge of dangerous chemicals. And because of that, she couldn't get the clearance, and she didn't get the job. To this day, it's one of the McHugh stories that we just don't talk about when we get together for the holidays. But you know, it was a classic example for me that sometimes we forget that what we do can impact others. That the choices we make, sometimes if we don't reflect on what we're doing, can impact people 8 years down the road, 20 years down the road, even 40. As I learned at the age of 18 that there's some things that were way too complex for this little head of mine that I shouldn't have been messing around with, and it could impact me, it could impact my sister, it could impact my family, it could impact our reputation. And it was after that that I started doing something that I've done every day since then. I begin every morning in prayer and reflection, and I ask 2 questions. Number 1, what do you need me to do today? What do you need me to do today? Not what do I want to do today, or what does my boss ask me to do today, or what should I be, what I want to do. What do you need me to do today? And then the second question I ask is, what do you need me to do today that's going to matter for all of eternity? What do you need me to do today that's going to matter for all of eternity? And when I focus my day at the beginning of the day with those 2 questions, my choices are much better than when I got an FBI record. Part of that, internally at Kwik Trip, we believe the most important part of our job for our 22,000 coworkers is not selling gasoline and hot dogs. We believe that there's a purpose in what we do, and it's larger than just making a buck. I know this quote breaks all the rules of PowerPoint presentations. It's too many words on a page, I get that. But this quote is too good to pass up. It's a guy from the name of Jim Collins. Those of you who study business, you'll recognize the name. Built to Last, Good to Great, it's classic books. Now this guy's a business author. He doesn't write religion. He's not a philosopher. He's not a poet. He talks about what makes companies 16 times more profitable than the stock market average. And he said, if you want to be a successful organization or company, make sure your employees can plug into this statement. For in the end, it's impossible to have a great life unless it's a meaningful life. And it's very difficult to have meaningful life without meaningful work. Perhaps then you might gain that rare tranquility that comes from knowing that you've had a hand in creating something of intrinsic excellence that makes a contribution. Indeed, you might even gain the deepest of all satisfactions, knowing that your short time here on this earth has been well spent and that it mattered. That's a business author saying if you want a successful organization, make sure everybody can plug into that statement, knowing that their work has meaning more than just making a buck. Well, as Brent mentioned, I go out through the tri-state area talking about our purpose at Kwik Trip. And a couple years ago, I was over in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, talking to the senior management team of Mercury Marine, the company that builds the boat motors. It was a 2-hour presentation about purpose at work, but not just making a buck. And as I'm doing this presentation, their lead engineer was in the back corner of the room. A big, tough-looking guy, I'd say late 50s. Looked like the kind of guy that if it was closing time at the bar scene, you wouldn't mess with this guy because he'd mess with you. And I could tell by the look on this guy's face that he's not buying what I'm selling. You know, I do enough of this. I can read body language. And so at the end, I said, well, any questions, comments, concerns, rebuttals? And he shoots his hand up right away, and he points to my slides. And he said, that is a load of fill in the blank. He said, there's no purpose in what I do. I design and build boat motors. There's no purpose in that. I said, sir, can I have 5 minutes? First 7 years of my life, my family lived in South Milwaukee. As I mentioned, my dad worked construction, never graduated high school. My dad had an Irish temper. So if things hadn't gone well on the job site that day, we knew about it when Dad got home. You know that old adage, if something doesn't go well at work, you leave it at the door, you don't bring it home with you, kind of? You know, not true in the McHugh household. You know, if it didn't go well at work, we knew about it as soon as Dad walked in the door. He had an Irish temper. But my dad's attitude and disposition changed completely at the beginning of every summer. And this is how it happened. It started on Friday of Memorial Day weekend, 5 o'clock. Dad would get home, and he would back our 1973 Dodge Charger up to that boat, Glastron with the Mercury Marine on the back. And then we would drive 5 hours north up to northern Wisconsin, up old Highway 51 when Highway 51 was still 2 lanes going through Wausau and Merrill, and you remember you'd pass all the Chips restaurants, you know? And we'd get to a place north of Mercer called Pine Lake. We'd get there about 11:30 at night. Dad would put the boat in the water. I was 4 years old at the time. He'd put me in the boat, and then we would drive out to the middle of the lake. He'd turn the boat motor off, and he'd put my life jacket on nice and tight, and then put me in his arms and go, and a 1, and a 2, and a 3, and he'd throw me in the lake. And he and I would go swimming for the next half hour, and then about midnight we'd get back in the boat, go back to the cottage. And for the next 2.5 days, my dad's attitude completely changed. He was fun to be with. He was relaxed. It's not like he was my dad, but the ideal older brother you always wanted to have. And then on Monday of Memorial Day at noon, we would put the boat back on the trailer and drive 5 hours south back to South Milwaukee. And if any of you have ever done that trip from northern Wisconsin to Milwaukee, you know you go on Highway 41 through Fond du Lac. And we would pass the Mercury Marine plant. And again, I was 4 years old at the time, the back seat of the Charger. And Dad would say to me, Johnny, look out the window. You see that big building? That's the home of the boat motor. And I remember being a little boy in the back seat of that car looking at that building, being so grateful that it existed. Because inside that building, they built something that changed my dad. And I said, sir, my dad's been gone 10 years now. The best memories I have of my dad are because of that boat, those weekends. I don't know if you were working here at Mercury Marine at the time, but if you were, I want to thank you for building something that changed my dad. Big, tough engineer, and there's tears streaming down his cheeks. And he walked out of the room that afternoon, and he said, hey, thanks for teaching me that my job has a purpose. I realized that I don't build boat motors. I realized that I bring joy to people's lives, and there's a difference. I'm a firm believer that we have a purpose on this planet, and it's deeper than just making a buck. Because at the end of the day, if that's all we're driven for, it doesn't lead to happiness. Do the studies. And so at Kwik Trip, first day on the job, we all tell our 22,000 coworkers, the most important part of your job is not selling gasoline and hot dogs. If you think that's the case, you've already flunked the Kwik Trip School of Business. First day on the job, we tell them the most important thing we want you to do every day is our mission. And our mission? To treat others as you'd like to be treated. It's the golden rule, applied to business. We actually interview for a fit with that mission statement. So for all of our positions, whether you're driving our truck, making the donut, selling the donut, here are the first 3 questions we ask in the interview process, every single candidate. Number 1, tell me about the last random act of kindness you did for someone. What was the last random act of kindness you did? Number 2, how have you made a difference in someone's life this month? Again, trying to find out if you're other-centered. You know, are you concerned about others? And third one, how have you treated others as you personally would like to be treated in the last 6 weeks? The golden rule. We're trying to figure out whether or not they've lived by that already. And if they answer those first 3 questions, then we'll go further in the interview process. If they can't answer those 3, we don't go any further in the interview. We'll say thanks for your time. For us, we believe that what we do is contingent upon finding good people who just live by a sense of purpose in their lives. The good news for us at Kwik Trip, last year for 4,000 openings, we had 136,000 applications. So we can be picky. It's actually statistically, it's harder to get into Kwik Trip right now than it is Harvard or Stanford kind of thing. So we want to be selective because we want to make sure we just have good people that know that their job is more important than just selling stuff to people. And it works. And let me give you an example. It's one of our customer service letters, one of my favorite ones. I'm a regular customer at your Sheboygan store. In the past, my family has caused this store a lot of problems because my son constantly steals from them. In our industry, that's not a good thing, in case you're wondering. Your staff has always treated me with respect, even though my child has done this. On a side note, my family and I do not have much. My son went to the store on Saturday in February, And he had no socks on because we just don't have money right now for new ones. It was snowing pretty badly, and one of your staff members was outside shoveling. My son was sitting on the curb cleaning the snow out of his shoes. Your staff member, Matt, came up to my son and asked if he was okay. He helped my son clean the snow out of his shoes, and then gave my son his own socks off his feet. Matt also told my son that if he ever needed anything, just to come and ask. It gives a whole new meaning to giving someone the shirt off your back. Your staff continues to show respect to me, even after my child's mistakes that cost them time and money. Thank you for hiring caring people. When I got the letter, I was so touched, I emailed Jessica, the store leader. I said, hey, I got this really cool letter. Do you know anything about this? And Jess emailed this back. John, I was working when this happened. The coworker came back to me after he did this, and he sat down in my office and he cried because he felt so badly for that kid. I was very proud of my coworker. His name is Matt. He'll be with our company a year this May. He's 18 years old and still in high school. Kids these days, huh? You know? Well, I contacted Matt. I said, Matt, why did you do it? He said, well, you told me the first day in the job that the most important thing I was supposed to do is to treat others as you'd like to be treated. And if I didn't have socks, I would hope that somebody that had socks would share them with me. I was just doing what you asked me to do. You see what happens when you create a sense of purpose and a culture that's built around that? Is that good people, 18-year-old boys, give socks off their feet to somebody else. It's really what we're all about. It's a sense of purpose. Well, we also believe that there's a right way and a wrong way to do business. And we reflect on that. And here's where I learned the importance of that reflection time that I talked about. At the age of 7, my family moved us from South Milwaukee up to a little community near Wausau called Hatley, a town of 300 people, Highway 29. Well, we lived part of the outskirts of the village that had a gravel road. Well, when my parents purchased my first bicycle for me, they purchased for me when we were still living in Milwaukee. So it was a bike that was made for the sidewalks of South Milwaukee. Had nice smooth tires. We moved to Hatley, and those smooth tires were not very good on the gravel roads. All my new buddies that I found, they had those 20-inch bikes that had the knobby BMX tires, you know? And so these guys could fly on the gravel roads. I couldn't keep up. So one night I said to my dad, hey, Dad, can I get new tires for my bike? He said, well, are they flat? Well, no, they're not flat, but they're not knobby tires, and I can't keep up with the guys that have the knobby tires. I have smooth tires. They're not flat? No. Well, then you're not getting new tires. Pedal faster. So one day I was riding into town in the spot where the gravel road ends and the blacktop begins as you got into the village limits. There was across the road this cable, and the cable was attached to a little black box in the ditch. It had not been there the day before. So that night at dinner, I said, hey, Dad, you know where the gravel road ends and the blacktop begins? There's this cable across the road. What's that for? He said, well, is it attached to a little black box in the ditch? I said, yeah. He said, well, it's a meter. It's a sensor that the Department of Transportation puts there. And every time a car goes across the cable, the weight of the car registers a little click in the box. And at the end of the month, they pick up the box, and if there's a lot of clicks in the box, it means we have a lot of traffic on our road, and they'll upgrade our road from a gravel road to a black. You know where this story's going to, don't you? So as soon as I found that out, I beelined at the spot where the cable is. I started jumping on this cable. Well, you know, as a 68-pound weakling, that was not enough to send a click in the box. But I remembered my physics. Force equals mass times acceleration. So I went to my dad's garage, because he was a construction worker, and I got his 10-pound sledgehammer, thinking if I could hit this cable dead center, that'll be enough to set a click in the box. So I get his sledgehammer, I go to the spot in the middle of the road, and I start whacking at this cable. And if I was lucky enough to hit the cable just dead center in the box, you heard this little mechanical click, like sweet. Well, I'm whacking at this cable, and much to my demise, there's a house right there, and it's owned by John Zajakuski. John's actually a retired police officer from Wausau. So he looks out the picture window, and he sees little Johnny McHugh in the middle of the road with the sledgehammer. So he opens up the front door, and he said, Johnny, what are you doing? I said, oh, hey, I'm getting us a blacktop road. Get home right now. Da-da-da. So I walked home, walked into the garage with the sledgehammer, and there's my mom and dad waiting for me. Mr. Zajikuski had to call Mr. and Mrs. McHugh and tell them what Johnny was up to. And my mom said to me, Johnny, what were you thinking when you did that? I said, well, I was trying to get us a blacktop road. She said, you think that's the right way to get a blacktop road? Do you think that's the honest way to get a blacktop road? No. So this is what my parents did for me for a punishment every time I pulled a stunt like this. For the next month, every night after dishes were done, chores were done, I had to go into my bedroom and I had to sit in my red vinyl beanbag chair. Remember those from the 70s? And I had to listen to an album, a record, 33, of the Letterman singing inspirational songs. I still have the whole album memorized. I remember it. Old Man River, that old man. I got the whole album memorized. Because every time I pulled a stunt like this, my mom said, for the next month, every night, you're going to sit in that beanbag chair, you're going to listen to those words, and you're going to reflect on what you're doing. That, Johnny, there's a right way to do it, and there's a wrong way to do it. And the catch is, if we don't reflect on what we're doing, there's a good chance that we might be doing business the wrong way. That when all is said and done, it's bad for all of us. The other piece to this, and I'm very grateful that all of you gather once a month for this, because for us to do things the right way and what really matters, we can't do it alone. There's nothing about what we do in which it says, you know, we want you to be the Lone Ranger. We just want you to do it on your own. All this works best if we do it together. There's a wisdom that comes from us doing this together, talking about it, gathering once a month, discussing what really matters, real purpose. Here's where I learned the importance of doing it together. You know, there's this wonderful line in the scriptures that when Jesus sends them out, he sends them out 2 by 2. And I don't think that was accidental. There's a safety in numbers. First part of my professional career, I was actually a teacher. I taught at Aquinas High School in Crosse for several years. Well, those first couple of years I was teaching, I have 2 friends, Mike and George, who are also educators. And every summer, we would vacation together, the 3 of us. All 3 of us were bachelors at the time. George and Mike, a little bit older than I am, and they were very staid in their ways. So it was always the same vacation. It was always the 3rd week of August before school started. It was always to the same place. We'd leave on Sunday. We'd go up to Door County. We'd stay there till Thursday night. And every day, all the years, the pattern was exactly the same. We'd go to breakfast at Al Johnson's, AJ's, you know, the place that has the goats on the roof, you know. And then we would go to Sister Bay to a place called Mance Specialty Foods, owned by Eunice and Larry Mance. They're now retired. And they would prepare for us a picnic basket lunch. And then we would take this picnic basket lunch to Newport State Park. We'd put the picnic basket lunch underneath the shade tree. And then for the next couple hours, George, Mike, and we would float on these cheap inflatable rafts in Lake Michigan. And for those of you who've ever been to Newport State Park, you know that that part of the lake, you can go hundreds and hundreds of yards out, and the water's still only this deep. And that's real significant, because neither George nor I swim real well. I think after being thrown in the lake at 4 years old at midnight, it kind of scared me from deep waters, you know. And Mike's a bad swimmer. So what we do is we would float on these rafts for 3 hours, eyes shut, and we'd just be talking about what we're going to teach that year, what books we had read over the summer, what crazy McHugh stories I was going to use in the classroom, and so on. Well, as you were floating there with your eyes shut talking, if you heard the voices of Mike and George getting a little farther away, you realized that you were drifting out there. Of course, I don't ever want to drift that far out there, so I paddle back. Then after we were done floating around about noon, we'd go back into shore and we'd have the picnic basket lunch, go back to the respective hotels that we had stayed at. I was always in one of the cheap places, take a nap. And then we would reconvene at some nice restaurant in Door County for dinner. Same pattern every single day, all the years, with one exception. It was the summer, it was so incredibly hot. Matter of fact, it was the August that Corey Stringer from the Minnesota Vikings had died from heat stroke that week. Some of you might remember that. Well, it was so hot that we realized it was probably not wise in terms of food safety to get the picnic basket lunch and leave it sit out for 3 hours and then eat it. So that week we changed it up. We'd go to breakfast, go right to the beach. And then 11 o'clock, 1 or 2 of us would go back into town and retrieve the picnic basket lunch. Well, Monday, it was my turn to go back into town and get the lunch. Tuesday, it was George's turn. Wednesday, it was so hot that day, there was only 2 places where you could get comfortable. Either right in front of your air conditioning in your car at full blast, or you didn't put all the air in that cheap air mattress and you could float in the water, but be mostly submerged at the same time. It was just heavenly. So Wednesday, George and Mike said, it's too hot. We're going back in the car. We'll go get thing. You can stay out here by yourself. This is awesome. It's comfortable. It's relaxing. So they left, and I fell sound asleep. So comfortable, those light waves and in that water and the sun on you. And I woke up about 40 minutes later to, John. And I wake up, and I floated out there, like way out there. Like I'm talking wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald down below me out there kind of thing, right? And I panicked because, I'm terrified of deep water. George doesn't swim. Mike's a bad swimmer, so I have to get back to shore. And I paddled so hard and so fast. You know, on those cheap inflatable rafts, you know where the seam is glued together and it's kind of sharp on the edges? I paddled so hard and so fast that I tore all the skin off the underside of my armpits. Got to shore, stood up, and there's blood just streaming down my sides. Good news is I lived to tell the story. But here's what I learned. The only reason why I drifted off into the deep, dangerous waters is that I didn't have the voices of George and Mike around me. That all the other years, that if eyes were shut and I heard their voices, I realized what was happening, I'd paddle back. But when I was on my own, nobody around me, that's when all of a sudden I woke up and went, oh, how did I end up here? I believe our journey as good men operates the same way. That if we think we can do this on our own, even if we're a good person, and we think we have the right morals or we have the right faith, there's always this chance that you're going to wake up one day and go, how did I end up here? I'm in deep doo-doo. I'm in deep waters. But if we have people around us who also have the same values and we talk about it on a frequent basis, what's the purpose? Am I doing it ethically? Am I doing it the right way? You know, your chances of ending up in the deep, dangerous waters are almost non-existent. I don't think it's accidental that Jesus sent them out 2 by 2. And I applaud all of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to do this, to keep you on track, to keep you out of the deep waters. Because when we do it together, it's much safer. The other piece, I think, for those of us who are strong believers, have faith, I think we've learned that there's some words that are so powerful that we can't say them enough. One of the things I do at Kwik Trip is I'll interview people who want to come into the management team. And so I'll say, hey, why do you want to come work for Kwik Trip? And they'll say, well, you know what, I've worked for this other company for 20 years, and every Friday my boss comes to me and tells me I do a great job, thanks me for what I'm doing. Every Friday my boss compliments me, and I'm just getting sick and tired of hearing it. I want to go someplace where I don't. Yeah, we chuckle because just the opposite is true. People will say to me, you know, I worked for this other organization for 20 years, and I'm never thanked. They don't ever compliment me. I want to go someplace where I feel appreciated. I just want to hear those words from time to time. That those words are so powerful, you can't say them enough. I witnessed that 2 years ago. We were doing training for our new store coworkers up in St. Cloud, Minnesota. It was a new market for us. So when we go into a new market, we'll take the entire training team up there and we'll do some training. Well, I was up there for Monday and Tuesday of that week, and Tuesday morning, one of the other trainers was with me, Jill McDonough, was celebrating her 15th anniversary of employment at Kwik Trip. She's a great trainer. So we have a tradition that at Kwik Trip, if it's your 1-year anniversary or 3, 5, 10, or 15, we make a big deal out of that. Well, Jill loves chocolates. So that morning before training, I went to the grocery store in St. Cloud, and I found that 3 boxes of the nicest chocolates I could find. 1 box for each of her 5 years. So I went to the checkout line. The store was pretty deserted, and I put them down at the cash register, and the lady working the cash register said, oh, these are the best chocolates on the planet. I love these chocolates. You're going to love these. I say, hey, well, that's excellent news, but they're not for me. They're for one of my coworkers. I got her 1 box for each of her 5 years of employment. Oh, where do you work? And I said, Kwik Trip. She said, oh, I would love to work for you. So I swiped my credit card, grabbed the bag. I walked out. Just about to get into my car in the parking lot, she abandons her register, comes out to meet me in the parking lot, says, I'm dead serious. I want to work for you. She said, I've been here 17 years. They've never thanked me. They never let me forget my mistakes, and they don't train me. I want to go someplace where they don't do that. I want to be thanked. I want to be trained. That's what we want. We want to feel appreciated from time to time. And for us as leaders, I think it's incumbent upon us to express that to our people. There's also, I think, as men of faith, I also think there's some other words that are so powerful we can't say them enough. And that's in our personal relationships. Some phrases like, I love you, for those of us who have a spouse or significant other or children. They never go tired of hearing that from us. And here's where I learned that. As I mentioned, I grew up in this little town called Hatley. One Saturday night, we went to church. And in the front pew was Dan and Pearl. Older couple. They were celebrating their 50th anniversary of marriage that night. So they were going to renew their wedding vows in front of the whole congregation. And our pastor, instead of doing the traditional sermon, decided to bring the portable microphone down to Dan and Pearl in the front row and said, we have a lot of young couples in the congregation here, some getting ready for marriage. You guys have made it 50 years. You obviously have some accumulated wisdom. Why don't you share your secret to success? How did you make it 50 years? And Pearl grabs this microphone, and she goes on and on and on all those things she thinks makes a great marriage. Problem solving, of never letting the sun set in your anger, of balancing the checkbook, of making good meals, and blah, 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 blah. Well, finally, she paused for just a second to catch her breath. And our pastor grabbed the microphone from her because otherwise she kept on going. I'd still be there, you know. Well, Pearl, hey, thanks for that. Dan, how did you make it 50 years? And old Dan grabs the microphone and turns around and he smiled at the congregation and revealed the fact that he hadn't even put his false teeth in that night and says, kept my mouth shut. Gave back the microphone. The place just busted. I got laughing. Well, a year later, we were at the funeral. His wife of then 51 years had died suddenly. They were farmers, retired farmers. They didn't have any children, no grandchildren, so the funeral was very small. And the tradition in Hatley was that if you were in 8th grade at the time, you were a mass server for the funerals. I was the mass server for the funeral. And our cemetery in Hatley is right next to the church. So after the prayers inside the church were finished, we went out to the graveside for the burial. When the prayers at the graveside were finished, old Dan looked on top of the coffin and he saw the flowers on top there. And he pointed to them and he said, hey, can I have one of those? And Mike Schulte, who was our funeral director at the time, reached up and he grabbed a single red rose from the top of the bouquet and he gave it to Dan. And old Dan clutched that rose so hard and he cried so hard his body shook. And he kept saying over and over again, I love her. I love her. I love her just as much now as I did 51 years ago when she held those flowers on her wedding day. I love her. And then he stopped. And you could tell that he was looking through 51 years worth of stories and memories. And when he found the right story, he shared it with us. He said, when we were first married, we lived out on Pike Lake. It's just south of Hatley. He said that first summer we were married, every evening we'd go down to the dock and we'd take our shoes and stockings off. You know, you're always talking to an old person, they refer to them as stockings. And we put our feet in the water and we'd hold hands. We watched the sunset as this pair of loons would circle the lake making that beautiful loon call. He said, I'm not a romantic kind of guy. It was kind of romantic. Watching the sunset, listening to the loons holding the hand of your bride. It was romantic. He said the second summer, only the drake returned. Its mate didn't come back. And Dan told me something that I didn't know. He said, loons mate for life. And when they go south for the winter months, they separate. And when they're apart in the winter months, they physically do not make that loon call. They only make that beautiful sound when they're together as a couple. So that second summer, that drake circled the lake day after day, night after night, unable to open its beak, unable to make that sound, unable to make the music because it didn't have its mate. He said the third summer, the drake didn't come back either. He said, I don't know what happened to it. My conclusion was this. It died, lost its reason for its existence. Couldn't make the music because it didn't have its mate. And he said, when I came to that conclusion that third summer, this is what I did every single night for the next 47 years of our marriage. Never missed a night, he said. He said, even if it had been a holy war between Pearl and I that day, I'd get into bed and I'd grab Pearl's hand and say, Pearl, I love you. He said, I never missed a night in the last 47 years of marriage to tell her that. he clutched that rose so hard next to her grave, and he said, I love her. I love her. And he could tell it was coming from the depths of his heart. I was a 12-year-old boy at the time, but it made such an impression upon me that there's some words that are so powerful you can't say them enough. The lovely and talented Maggie McHugh, my wife, came on the scene long after Dan and Pearl were gone, but she's the beneficiary of Dan's wisdom. Proud to say that my years of marriage, I've never missed a day of telling Maggie I love her. Now, I'm a schmuck as a husband. I know that, and she tells me that from time to time. But the one thing she'll always tell me, you know what, I always know you love me because you tell me. And I'm on the road pretty substantially for work. I'll be on the road three times this week, and the last thing I do in the hotel is I turn the light off, I grab my cell phone and say, honey, I'm going to bed, I love you. Never missed a night. And I don't think she ever grows tired of me saying that to her. As men of faith, there are some words that are so powerful we cannot say them enough. Thank you. You do good work. Boy, your job has purpose. And for those who are important to us, I love you. And with that, what we really believe now comes out in the real world. Thank you guys for being here today. Thank you for the commitment to do this not one at a time, but 2 by 2. Thank you for taking time out of your schedules to reflect on the fact that what we do is important. There's a purpose to it. That's not simply what we want to do or what we think we should do, but what do you need us to do? And when we ask that, our world is a better place. Thanks for your time and attention. It's good to be with you this afternoon.